Hey there! Are you a crime scene investigator, law enforcement officer, or forensic scientist looking for a Facebook community that understands you? Check out Taction USA's forensic product groups. You'll find blogs, articles, information, and community. For those of us in the investigative field, there are not many lines of support out there, but Taction USA is a company that was founded by law enforcement for law enforcement. Subscribe today to get access to exclusive content. Just look for Taction USA in Facebook groups. Welcome to Crossing the Tape, your favorite true crime podcast. Please sign the crime scene log and join us. I'm one of your hosts, Hillary, and I'm joined by my husband,
Brendan.
And today you're here to listen to episode 25, Ruth-less.
Now, in our previous episode, we talked about a fella who was a killer and who eventually had himself a girlfriend who believed he was innocent until the end, and her name was Ruth-less. Not the same.
Different one.
Initially, we thought that was the same person, which would have been really interesting, but no.
This is still interesting.
Yes. Historic, too. This is a different Ruth Ellis. Now, Ruth Ellis was born Ruth Nielsen in the town of Rhyl, I believe it's pronounced, but what do I know, in North Wales in October of 1926. As a young girl, her family moved to England. Her mother Elisa was a Belgian refugee, and her father Arthur was a cellist by trade. However, his career didn't bring the family much in the way of wealth. Ruth, her older sister, and 4 younger siblings grew up poor. Arthur Nielsen had a twin brother named Charles who, in 1928, died after crashing into a lorry, known in the U.S. as like a shipping truck, while riding his bicycle. Now, the loss of his twin brother took a tremendous toll on Arthur, resulting in him becoming abusive towards his children, unfortunately to include sexual abuse. And Elisa, the mother, turned a blind eye to these actions, while Arthur focused his indecency on Muriel, the oldest of 6 children.
Jeez.
Eventually, Arthur impregnated Muriel, resulting in her having a child at age 14. And that child was raised among the other siblings, like it was just another one of the kids. At 14, though, Muriel had obviously already entered puberty, and Arthur lost interest in her. Which meant, next in line was Ruth, who became the object of his terrible desires. And Ruth spent the remainder of her childhood doing her best to fend off her father's sexual advances. And after a stint in boarding school, Ruth moved to London alongside her brother's girlfriend, Edna. Her brother was away at war, or at least in the service, but I believe around that time.
Yeah, that should be.
Things were heating up in Europe. But Ruth and his girlfriend, Edna, moved to London, and the pair stayed with Arthur, who unfortunately was working as a chauffeur in London at that point. Arthur would have eventually have an affair with Edna, after Ruth continued to spur his creepy advances. So now he's fooling around with his son's girlfriend.
I don't think any of that was caused by the death of his twin brother. I really don't think that was...
Yeah, I'm guessing he was able to keep all that under control.
Yes, and that's the point when he lost it and began doing these awful things.
Forget it, I'm just going to do whatever I want.
Right.
That's how he coped with the depression, I guess. Gross.
Yeah. Ew.
Ruth worked in London as an usher at a theater until she became pregnant at age 17 in 1944. The father of the child was a Canadian soldier who soon left London and gave up supporting Ruth and the child not long after. He sent money back for about a year and then was just out of the picture entirely. Ruth sent the child, Andy, to live with her mother and worked several different jobs in order to send money back home. In the late 1940s, Ruth worked her way up to a hostess spot at a nightclub where she had to contend with a manager who liked to coerce his female employees into sleeping with him.
Ugh. So that's when that's all her life.
So she went from creepy father
to creepy boss,
criminal father, to deadbeat dad of her child.
Yeah, to creepy boss.
Yeah. And it's only just begun.
Ugh.
Ruth also did some nude modeling around this time to make ends meet, and by the 1950s she'd become a high-end escort and would terminate a pregnancy after a rendezvous with a client.
Yeah.
So she's had one child and aborted a second.
Right.
In November of 1950, Ruth married George Ellis, a dentist, divorcee, alcoholic abuser who convinced himself that Ruth was seeing someone else behind his back. Yeah. So,
right. Her first actual marriage isn't much different than the rest.
The crap she's been dealing with anyway. Their on and off relationship came to a head when Ruth gave birth to Georgina Ellis in 1951. So, third pregnancy, second child. George denied the child being his and divorced Ruth before long, and he refused to give any kind of support. He convinced himself, well, she's stepping out on me. Ruth, once again a single mother of a newborn, returned to escort work. Ruth caught a major break in 1953 when she landed the position of manager of a nightclub in Kent and was able to stay in an apartment above the club. This allowed her to mingle with various celebrities and high society types, and of course brought new male suitors into her life. She met an amateur race car driver, an alcohol enthusiast, boozer, named David Blakely, and the pair quickly started a relationship. Blakely was engaged to another woman, but that didn't stop him from moving in with Ruth and even impregnating her. So, yet again, a nice, decent man.
Was not him.
No.
Has yet to been found in this episode.
Yeah, every guy in this episode's a bit gross.
Yeah.
Even guys that really had nothing to do with Ruth directly. We'll get there. Ruth decided to terminate this pregnancy as well because she didn't feel the relationship was as serious as Blakely felt it was. So in her mind, it was kind of a fling.
Well, yeah, he's engaged to somebody else.
Well, that doesn't bother him. He wants to be engaged to this woman, too, or instead. I don't know. So, fourth pregnancy terminated. 2 children
and
already.
Back then, too, that's very hard on a woman's body anyway. But back then...
Yeah, I don't think they were as advanced.
No, so procedures. That's scary for her health as well.
Ruth began seeing another man, Desmond Cusson, great name, during this time. He was a former Air Force pilot who became an accountant, and Ruth decided to move in with the successful Cusson, but didn't end her more or less casual relationship with Blakely. So, she's now with someone who's, by all accounts, solid, but she's still seeing...
Well, but at this point, she has an affinity for it.
Right.
Unfortunately, that happens a lot.
Yeah. It's hard to break the cycle.
Yes. Yeah.
You get in the rut. Blakely continued to see other people as well, but he still wanted to be with Ruth. His desire increasingly became violent, and Ruth sadly lost her 5th pregnancy when Blakely punched her in the stomach not long after she accepted a marriage proposal from him. So she's living with Cusson, still seeing Blakely.
And you gotta spell that, because it sounds like you're saying living with her cousin.
Well, we don't know.
I know, no.
Desmond Cusson, Cussen.
Yes.
So
just wanted to clarify.
Not cousin,
right.
Cusson. But she's living with Desmond.
Right.
And still seeing Blakely.
But engaged to Blakely.
Now accepts an engagement from Blakely, who then causes her to miscarry her 5th pregnancy after he beat her up yet again. And I don't know if she had any certainty on if this was Cusson's child or Blakely's child. I didn't see if there was a determination. On the evening of Easter Sunday of the same year, 1955, Ruth went looking for Blakely at his apartment and arrived just in time to see his car pulling away. So they were engaged in January, and same time the miscarriage happened.
Right.
So now it's April, and she decides she's going to go find Blakely. She sees his car pulling away from the apartment, and she walked down to a nearby bar where she correctly suspected he would be. After all, he's a alcohol enthusiast.
Right.
Ruth waited outside for him, and at 9:30 he finally exited the bar. The pub, walking past her as he made his way to his car. And from behind David Blakely, Ruth Ellis drew a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, which she fired, missing the first shot. As people do when there is gunfire, Blakely began to run, running around his car trying to get away as the second shot hit him, dropping him to the ground. Ruth then fired 3 more times while Blakely was down, including a contact shot into his back. So, gun powder burns and all, less than an inch from his back. And then, for good measure, she fired the 6th and final round from the revolver, but that one missed, resulting in a ricochet off the street, striking a bystander's thumb. Some poor woman who's watching this madness unfold gets a bullet in the thumb, or blown off.
Right. At least that's all it was.
Yeah. Glad it didn't hit her anywhere else.
Yeah.
But before we get to the aftermath of Ruth Ellis' actions, we have a brief message for you from the National Investigative Training Academy.
If you are looking for a career change or to expand your knowledge in an already established one, look no further than the National Investigative Training Academy. The National Investigative Training Academy, or NITA, N-I-T-A, has well over 100 courses with 70 professional development ones alone. NITA is constantly adding to their course catalog, and courses are focused on private investigation and security fields. Whether you would like to become a private investigator or you need continuing education for your investigative or security career, the National Investigative Training Academy is for you. All courses offered are 100% online and do at your own pace. Once completed, you will receive a certificate in that course. Sign up today at investigativeacademy.com. Make sure when you sign up for your courses, you mention we sent you there. We encourage you to get the best investigative and security training possible today. When you sign up, mention our brand ambassador code, BA2367. That's BA2367, and you can find those courses at investigativeacademy.com. Look for links in our show notes as well.
After emptying her gun into David Blakely, Ruth returned to Clive Gunnell, Blakely's friend, who was at the bar with him. Ruth asked Clive to call the police, but that wasn't necessary, as an off-duty policeman approached her and easily removed the gun from her hand, telling her, "I am the police." To which Ruth replied, "Will you please arrest me?" The officer, of course, obliged. As Ruth stated, "I am guilty, I'm a little confused." She was arrested and booked without innocent, calm throughout the process. She appeared in court the following day, where a judge ordered she be held until trial. So she's murdered this man in the street, unloaded a gun on him, and just went, "All right, I'm all done."
Which I think she's having a nervous breakdown.
I think so. But check this out.
Okay.
Prior to trial, she was examined by a court-appointed doctor who determined she was not suffering from a mental illness. A psychiatrist hired by her defense attorney reached the same conclusion, as did a court-appointed psychiatrist. So a doctor and 2 psychiatrists said, no, she's of sound mind.
Oh, dear.
But I don't think she was in the moment.
No, that's what I'm thinking.
To determine.
Well, that is hard to determine. But I'm thinking it's more of an in the moment. It doesn't excuse what she did.
No, certainly not.
But I'm thinking because she also had children.
Yes.
So
yeah, she's got a 10-year-old and I think a 3-year-old.
Right. So a mother, you would think, would, especially someone like her she's ultimately alone. I'm sorry, but she is. You know, she's in and out with men that don't really devote 100% of their time to her.
They're harmful and abusive.
So it seems like she would, even if she had that thought, but then she'd think of her children. So to me, not an excuse, but she probably wasn't of sound mind in that moment.
Yes. And she probably, when she said, "I'm a little confused," she probably was regaining a lot of clarity after that happened. Yeah. And realizing, oh, I just did that. Yeah. Now, as is sometimes the case in criminal trials, defendants will alter their appearance to look weaker, younger, smaller, or less fortunate in the hopes of gaining sympathy from the jury right on sight. Right. Though Ruth's attorneys tried to convince her to take steps such as these, she arrived in court for her trial in June of 1955, as much a looker as ever, her hair bleached, styled, she wore a silk blouse under a black suit, and Ruth looked less like an unfortunate woman driven to madness by the mistreatment of her lover, and more like a movie star. Yeah. It kind of sounds like they're describing Marilyn Monroe.
I know, that's what I was thinking.
The prosecutor, Christmas Humphreys, real name, Christmas, had only a single question for Ruth when she took the stand. He inquired what she intended to do when she held the gun to Blakely's back and fired while he was on the ground.
Yeah, I know. So to me, that's the one, like, that part. And then her unloading the rest. Mm-hmm. Like, up to then, she could have been like, well, I wasn't shooting at him. She could have made a plethora of excuses. But when you have that with a contact shot.
She put the gun right to his back.
And then there was the witness with the thumb.
Yeah, so, the poor woman going, what's that noise?
She probably was pointing with her thumb. Gesturing.
Get a load of this. And then the tip of her thumb got blown off.
Poor thing.
Yeah. But the only question was what she intended to do when she held the gun to his back and fired while he was on the ground. And Ruth responded, it's obvious when I shot him, I intended to kill him. So again, didn't deny anything, didn't try to, I just wanted to hurt him. I didn't think that would kill him. Not even pretending to be ignorant. Just, I was killing him.
Yeah.
Ruth also explained that she came into possession of the firearm several years prior when a military serviceman, possibly a client, gave it to her to cover a debt. And after 20 short minutes of deliberation, Ruth was convicted by the jury and sentenced to death by the judge. Mm-hmm. Ruth's family attempted to have the conviction and sentence overturned, but Ruth didn't want any part of the appeal. So once again, she's not looking for any leniency or any way to get off. She's just kind of living with it.
Right.
She told them, please don't write any letters. There were still a lot of letters. But her attorney in particular filed a lengthy letter asking for reprieve, but the Home Secretary, which I guess the U.S. equivalent to that is like the Secretary of the Interior kind of thing.
Okay.
But it sounds like in the English justice system, they have more authority over courts and such.
Okay. So
Home Secretary Gwilym Lloyd George wouldn't budge on the sentence. And 28-year-old mother of two, Ruth Ellis, was executed on the morning of July 13th, 1955.
Wow.
Just 3 months after the murder of David Blakely.
That all went fast.
So she shot him on Easter, and she was gone before mid-July.
Right.
Extremely quick. Over here, we wouldn't even have the trial for the first couple of years in something like that. Ruth's death sentence was a surprise, as it wasn't common at the time for women to be sentenced to death, but the execution itself was even more surprising, because 90% of women sentenced to death during this time period received a reprieve. So it wasn't that they weren't sentencing women, it's just that when it actually came time to carry it out, there had been enough appeal or reprieve that they give them a lengthy prison term or life in prison.
Right.
So she was one of the rare ones that actually faced execution. This fact, combined with the speed at which the execution was carried out, raised many questions about whether or not Ruth should have been hanged. Now, there was never any doubt that Ruth Ellis killed David Blakely. There were witnesses everywhere, including one missing a thumb now.
Yes.
And she never denied it. Mm-hmm. However, Home Secretary Lloyd George received criticism for executing Ellis before additional police inquiries could be completed. Lloyd George maintained that sufficient inquiries were completed, all of which pointed to Ruth Ellis murdering David Blakely in cold blood unprovoked. Lloyd George added that the use of a firearm in the killing, having had injured an uninvolved passerby with her recklessness, and that Ruth was a woman of dubious sexual morals, as she mothered children from different fathers and lived with and dated Desmond Cusson while dating and becoming engaged to David Blakely. All of this despite the fact that the judge in the trial ordered the jury not to consider such factors because this was a criminal trial and not a moral trial. So it doesn't matter what you think of women with multiple partners. You need to judge based on the facts.
Yeah.
But then the Home Secretary says, well, she was out of control with a gun. She hurt somebody who had nothing to do with it. And, she was a little, and that's just gross.
Yeah.
That was part of his judgment as to why
well,
she wouldn't get a stay of execution.
I wonder if he was jealous. Or a client.
He may have dabbled. We don't know.
I know. I'm just saying. It just seems so severe, and so he's either extremely conservative and just unforgiving, or he has a personal connection.
Right. He needs to keep up a facade. But yes.
Or it was election year.
True. He was looking for the votes. Now, while many people call this a crime of passion, English law didn't recognize such a defense for her actions due to a lack of immediacy. Although Blakely had been abusive in the past, Ellis wasn't in any danger of his abuse at the time of the shooting. He didn't even...
She sought him.
Right. She went to him. He didn't even know she was there until he was running from gunfire.
He may not have even known then.
That's true. He just started running.
Yeah.
And he was laying face down after the second shot hit him. So yeah, he may not have even turned his head and seen who was shooting.
Yeah.
She may have been motivated by the abuse, but she hadn't been abused any time close to the shooting.
Right.
Their last encounter was in January, when she miscarried. Now, compounding this matter, however, is Ruth's lifelong struggles with men and abuse, starting with her father, leading to her sexually manipulative boss, then the drunken, violent first marriage, years of prostitution, finally troubles with Blakely. And some have argued that due to a lifetime of suffering at the hands of men who were never held accountable for how they treated her, Ruth was bound to snap at some point and was not in her right mind at the time of the murder.
Yeah.
So though the psychiatrist found she was of sound mind afterwards...
Probably not in that moment.
Right, I think...
It all came crashing down.
With all the pushing, she decided she was going to do something drastic, and then that was kind of behind her.
Right.
Again, doesn't make it okay.
No. It's not an excuse for her behavior, it is an explanation.
Right. And something like that, would that lend itself more to a manslaughter charge, maybe?
Possibly,
first degree,
but it's still
like
very...
there was premeditation.
It's still kind of a gray area.
Right.
Especially her unloading the gun.
Yeah. And I mean, she didn't really do much to participate in her own defense.
No.
She just accepted everything and flat out said, well, I was trying to kill him when I shot him.
Right.
But I think a better defense could have been crafted about her being out of her mind in the moment.
But
she
may have not wanted that.
Right. Yeah, she may not have wanted to drudge up all that, because then it would have been, well, tell us about your father.
Right.
And your first husband, and this and that, and your feelings towards men who mistreat you. Now, in 1956, a journalist covering the controversial execution interviewed Andy, Ruth's oldest child, who was 10 when his mother was hanged. Andy explained that the revolver used to kill Blakely was given to his mother by Desmond Cusson a week prior to the murder, and that Cusson took her shooting to teach her how to use it. That story contradicted Ruth's explanation of the gun, and also implicated Cusson as an accessory.
Yeah.
So she initially said it was given to her by
a client,
a military serviceman who was a
while
client
back
to cover a debt.
Yeah.
And the gun was a military issue of the time, but Cusson was also retired Royal Air Force. So he may very well have had the same pistol at his disposal. Now, if Cusson did provide the gun and taught her how to use it, did he also encourage her to get rid of Blakely so that he didn't have to compete for her love?
Possibly.
Did Ruth lie about the origins of the gun to protect Cusson? If she was enticed to commit the murder, then Cusson should have been charged as a conspirator at a minimum, and Ruth may have received a lighter sentence or even a lesser charge.
Right.
If she was kind of put up to it by
Yeah.
Desmond. Now, the trouble with Andy's statement is that police hadn't interviewed him during the investigation, and while Cusson denied supplying the gun, due to the speed of the trial and execution, coupled with the denial of her attorney's appeal, those statements couldn't be confirmed or denied by Ruth herself.
Right.
Because she was already she was already gone by the time this information came to light.
Yeah.
And that naturally left the public with even more questions as to whether the death penalty was appropriate here. Home Secretary Lloyd George, his response to this possibility was that if it's true, it showed even more premeditation on the part of Ruth, because she had collaborated with another person a week ahead of time. But because there were no statements from Ruth about that, there was no evidence to implicate Cusson. So
no, but I mean, if it were true, he has a decent point.
Yes.
But we will never know.
Right, because it was almost like they had too many people on the list and they just needed
they just need to get it done.
We need to open up some of these jail cells, so start killing. It was very quick.
Yeah.
It was a month after the trial. Due to public pressure following the execution of Ruth Ellis, the Homicide Act of 1957 greatly limited the use of the death penalty, and then the Murder, or the Abolition of the Death Penalty Act of 1965, abolished the death penalty in Great Britain outright. The last male execution in Britain was in 1964, and the last woman to be executed there was Ruth Ellis in 1955.
Wow.
So, not just her case. There were other issues with possibly innocent people being hanged and so on. But the attention that Ruth Ellis's case brought was one of the driving forces behind getting rid of the death penalty altogether.
Right.
Interesting. And it's weird that, well, she obviously murdered that guy and wanted to and intended to.
Right. But
should she have been put to death with all the other factors that they just kind of brushed aside?
Yeah, I don't know. That is a hard one.
It's a moral dilemma, but morals were not supposed to be a factor in the trial. Just in upholding her sentence.
But at the same time, sometimes I feel like people's behavior and a history of behavior somewhat explains actions, whether explains further guilt or explains possibly someone accused wrongfully in their innocence or explains mental capacity at that time.
Right.
Now, if she had been put into a mental home, I mean, all the doctors said she was fine. But if she had, that might have been worse than death.
True.
Especially that era.
Yeah.
But
was it Broadmoor? Is that the famous asylum?
Yeah.
Across the pond? But
I think there were too many gray areas for it to be deemed, put to death so quickly, too. Like, there was no other investigation.
I mean,
Now, what she did was not right. I'm not saying she was innocent. She was not. But it seems like there could have been some more explanation, a little more investigation. And then if they thought she should be put to death, then continue,
Right. And her lack of appeal, that she didn't want it appealed at all. She didn't care, apparently. Issues like that are probably why here in the U.S., in places where we do still have the death penalty, I believe in all places, if not most, once there is a death penalty sentence given, the case is automatically appealed to a higher court, regardless of
automatically, and it's usually several times.
Wants. Right.
Usually several times.
Right, and then it's automatically appealed, and then the defendant can file.
Which again, appeals. And that's another area that's gray, because I feel like sometimes the death penalty doesn't really do anything anymore because they're there so long,
right,
on death row,
and
that sometimes they, if the if the outcome the court wanted was death
mm-hmm.
and execution, well, they wait so long sometimes, and I understand it's from the appeal process.
Right.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because then
it solidifies.
It solidifies that this is what needs to happen.
Yeah, this is the guilty party, and this is the appropriate sentence.
Right. But it also, I feel like sometimes it takes too long, and half of them, they are never executed because they just die in prison.
Plenty of death row inmates just die of natural causes after decades in prison.
So they're still punished by prison, but
it's not the fullest extent of the law that was intended to be applied to them.
Right. And I think some of them don't mind the death penalty, like being sentenced with that initially, because there are so many appeals.
Right. Because
where
they
other
know they can prolong it for a very long time.
With other sentencing, life in prison. And then sometimes they have a possibility of parole.
Right. But you're serving life.
But you're serving life.
Mm-hmm.
The death penalty could be taken away.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not against the death penalty when it is necessary,
mm-hmm.
but I feel like it's a little bit broken.
Yeah. We also it's kind of aggravating that if we have that in place, it doesn't make sense to have someone 30 years waiting to be executed, but we also can't.
We also can't pull a Ruth-less because that was way too quick.
She killed the guy yesterday, so just
that's
hang her in the park.
Right, that's way too fast.
Right, and especially that when it came to the gun, they didn't really do a whole lot of digging around. I mean, they took her at her word, which is what she wanted. Yeah, but you got to look a little deeper than that just to be safe, because people lie, people cover for other people.
Yeah. Sometimes it's cut and dry, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody else is the master behind it. And sometimes maybe it was just her. And she snapped.
She remembered, I've got that gun in the back of the closet, and that guy's treated me poorly. I'm just going to go take care of him.
Mm-hmm.
But we won't really know for sure if she was put up to it, manipulated by yet another man in her life, or if she decided that it would be worth whatever consequence to go ahead and just kill him. And 2 kids grew up without a mother because of it. Yeah.
Well, then that kind of makes me wonder, too, just if, Cusson put her up to it, did he either threaten her, or did he tell her he would take care of the kids? Right. Right. I mean, that's thinking outside the box. But people, I've learned, especially in this line of work, it never ceases to amaze me what people will do, or their quote-unquote logic for things.
Right. When they get in a bind, what they're willing to trade off with.
Right. But it is sad. I mean, she was not in the right, but her life was just terribly tragic.
Yeah, it was turmoil, and she eventually reacted to it.
Right.
And it's way too much.
Yeah, and her reaction was too much, and then the fact that it was all done and over so quickly is a little worrisome. So it doesn't surprise me that they changed their rulings because of that case. Yeah. And then especially then too, hanging. We're not talking about quick injection. Right. We're talking about a hanging. Yeah.
About in like a public square. Yeah. Which is nuts to think of today.
Especially in that era.
Yeah, it's the 1950s. Yeah. This wasn't the 1800s. No. They flat out hung a woman to death in front of a crowd. And then a couple months later realized,
that might not have been a good move.
Yeah, she might not have been the only guilty party here.
Right. Well, it's sure interesting.
Mm-hmm. And we thank you for joining us.
Yes.
We hope you had a great time listening to that awful story.
Maybe next time we'll do something different. Still some kind of crime podcast, but...
Yeah. Maybe we'll lighten the mood as we approach the holiday season.
Yeah, we've had a lot of really dark ones lately, but they've been interesting to me because they're ones I've never heard about.
Right, and the historical implications of this one, at least for Great Britain, pretty massive. Yeah.
So, thank you for listening. Stay safe.
Please sign the crime scene log on your way out. And so long.